Today's episode is sponsored by Tectonic Tourists. Do you need a van or equipment to go on tour? Tectonic Tourists has you covered. Large, reliable vans and great sounding equipment that bands like Metz, City of Caterpillar, Page 99, Chain Cult, Soul Glow, Infant Island, Soft Kill, and many more have used to tour and play all over North America. If you have a tour coming up, go to tectonictourist.com. Tectonic, like tectonic plates. TECTONIC, tourist.com. Hello, and welcome to Everything Remade, a podcast that I hope is about growth as much as it is about music. We've got a great show lined up for you today, but before we get started, a couple bits of news. First of all, Coma Regalia released our 8th album, Altomacia, on Friday, and so far, we've heard nothing but good things. Thanks to everyone who's listened, and if you haven't, go to middlemanrecords.bandcamp.com and check it out. Secondly, I'd like to remind you that we have a Patreon page at patreon.com/humanmachine. If you were a member there, you got access to the Coma Regalia album before everyone else. I plan on doing that with plenty of releases in the future, so for as little as $3, you can sign up and get early access to that, as well as full-time access to zines, behind-the-scenes, playthrough videos, and more. That's patreon.com/humanmachine. Lastly, I'd just like to say what a great time I had at the show on Friday. Thanks to John from Usurp for asking us out. They were lovely as always. In Loving Memory crushed it. Idiot was great, and Chickadee was amazing. Do go check all those bands out if you haven't already. And special thanks to anyone who came up to me at the show and said what a good time they've been having listening to the podcast. It really means a lot. And now, I'd like to play something for you. You're hearing Pouring Each Breath Into the Other, Then Both Will Be Made Whole by Demcats, featuring my new pals Zoe and Adam on drums and guitar respectively. The song comes from their self-titled debut album, which you can find at demcats.bandcamp.com.
I remember being told a lot by my dad that when he used to put on like the Art Ensemble of Chicago, if you ever heard of them, like a sort of really big, like sort of improvisational, like jazz kind of group, but they would all like wear masks and it was quite like sort of avant-garde. And this is quite like an old kind of group. Apparently when he'd show me this when I was quite young, I'd always kind of demand to hear it more or to hear it again. But I don't really remember that. But kind of, I guess around the house, when I was growing up, we had a lot of like stuff that's not really very big in the UK, like Fish and the Grateful Dead, like jam music. Mm-hmm. But then I guess for me, like when I really got excited by music was sort of like initially kind of hearing stuff like the first Alexis on Fire album, Thursday, that kind of thing, kind of maybe kind of click like, oh yeah, this is kind of music that I kind of, I don't know, a bit more my kind of music in a certain sense. And then a bit later on, it was kind of like, oh, well, now I've found blast beats, so that's the new big thing. But and yeah, that's the curse that's never left me, unfortunately. But yeah, I guess like the stuff that really kind of made me sort of switch gears into being like really serious about wanting to like practice and do music was, I guess, stuff that could have led me like a lot sort of deeper into screamo earlier, like early like Thursday, Alexis on Fire, that kind of thing, I guess, and like Glassjaw maybe as well.
Uh-huh. Have you gone back to that album that you mentioned before, the Chicago Ensemble? Have you gone back to that and have you experienced any kind of like nostalgia, like this brings out something, because you said you didn't remember it per se. So does that album like do something to you, like when you listen to it now? Is it?
Maybe not exactly that album, but definitely like when I've kind of heard like maybe little bits of stuff, like maybe some bits of Miles Davis, some bits of like Grateful Dead stuff, Fish stuff. I don't really kind of sit and listen to like intentionally so much, but when I've kind of heard bits of it, like bits that do kind of stick out, like as oh yeah, kind of something about that melody kind of brings something back a little bit.
Little deja vu.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't let me put kind of like words in your mouth or anything, but sort of I've always got the impression this is sort of like quite like a something that you kind of use to bond with your kind of parents quite a bit, right? Sort of yeah, kind of, because sort of when I was sort of getting to know you, you kind of like go on kind of trips with them a lot to go and do some, like meet kind of friends out in America to kind of go and see kind of stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, because I guess from like an American's perspective, it's kind of can maybe sound odd to people that I've spoken to, but stuff like the Grateful Dead, like really just do not exist in terms of like the cultural kind of sphere or kind of memory of like the UK. They're just kind of nobody knows about them. So yeah, my dad would like go on try to like make it over to the United States to see them live like a lot and kind of see the sort of the splinter like groups that came off that kind of scene. So yeah, we'd go on like trips to the US to like see stuff, which is very cool. Yeah.
That's wild. I had no idea that they weren't like. I mean, it's like, to me, it's safe to assume that their majority of their fans or whatever are in the U.S. But it's just they're so big here. It's strange to hear that they're just not really like that much of a thing, in the UK or other parts of the world. Like, I don't. How is that different? Do you think than like a Guns N' Roses or Metallica? Like, because I mean, they will pack a stadium over there, right? Or is that not true?
Yeah, for sure. I think like that kind of zone of things has really permeated through really strongly. Like absolutely everybody kind of knows who Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, all that kind of stuff is like very, very well known. But for whatever reason, like the jam scene in general, and I guess obviously the Grateful Dead are by far the biggest thing from that, are just it's kind of strange in a way, but yeah, it just really never took hold in terms of like mainstream culture in the UK at all. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you, like, not to speak for a whole group of people or anything, but do you think it's something specifically with like the jam aspect of the music? Like, is it like we don't have time for that, or like maybe I'm reading too much into that?
I don't know if we're the best people to ask.
Right.
It's a very interesting question. I mean, one angle I guess you could go for in a way is kind of, I guess, the way in which, I don't feel very like confident in my kind of knowledge of like the musicology of the Grateful Dead or anything like this, but I know that like a lot of the roots of it are in stuff like, I know that like Jerry Garcia was really obsessed at least at one point with like bluegrass, these very kind of almost like primordial kind of forms of like American music, and as well with the deep roots of blues coming from like the Black community as well. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like and these things as well, I feel, don't really have so much of a cultural presence in the UK. Like people know what blues is, but it doesn't really quite have the same presence. So it's perhaps that some of the kind of some of the musical roots that the Grateful Dead kind of were constructing their stuff on top of just don't quite have the same kind of foundation in the UK. So that might have something to do with it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, but you traveled in the United States a lot, like going to these shows and stuff. What, like, everyone that like the bands that I've toured with in Europe, like, we'll always talk about, yeah, you should come over to the States and play. And it's like always a bit of culture shock when it's like the next show will be like 7 hours from there, but were you used to that? Like, what was that experience like for you as a kid? Like perhaps like driving farther than you'd ever driven, or was that not the case? Would you just sort of land where you were supposed to go and then just Like, what were those trips like?
I feel like, yeah, I mean, coming from the UK, in a certain sense, it feels quite familiar. Like, it doesn't feel like a totally different world. Like, I ended up in about 2008, maybe, going to Russia on like a school trip, and that did feel very, very different to like a sort of Western European slash kind of Anglo-sphere kind of experience.
Mhm.
But going to America, in some ways, it feels very kind of like close and familiar, but at the same time there is a sense of like you do feel a certain like vastness to it. Like I remember when I would like leave the airport, all of a sudden like, wow, for some reason the sky looks really immense and I don't know why. And having talked to a few people from the UK that have been to America, I feel like some of them kind of get this as well. There's just something about, perhaps it's just the immense kind of flatness that you get in some places can make it just feel like there's just these immense kind of sense of scale to it that you don't really get in the UK in the same way.
When you were there, did you do kind of like, because we never actually talked about this, but didn't like this is something I've sort of not really kind of interacted with that much myself, but like I understand that kind of the culture with these kind of jam bands is people kind of like follow them around on tour, right?
Mhm.
Was this? I feel like that's. Is that like part of what was happening on the trip, or was it more kind of like we're going to this kind of like one show and then like?
Oh, usually we would kind of like, so the way that it would usually be structured, at least in the era that I saw any of it, which would be like maybe between like 2005 and 2015, let's say, is that they usually like a band would play like a run of shows at a single venue. And basically, like there would be almost like a kind of mini little community of people that would kind of set up and kind of have like all kinds of stalls, like selling things, selling food, maybe some people like providing like kind of like health services, some people like just selling merchandise, all kinds of things. And people were just there, carving out sort of a life kind of following this band around, at least for some like short like season. And yeah, it was kind of cool to like see something like that is completely absent from like any UK music scene. I don't know to what extent that's kind of completely unique in the US, but it definitely felt like a very special thing that I just hadn't really come across before. Yeah.
Were those the first kinds of shows that you had ever gone to? Or had you been to like just, like a band playing down the road from where you lived? Or
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, I think those would have been basically the first shows of any real kind of scale that I would ever have been to, which is quite like a strange entry point in a certain sense, like people doing these absolutely immense like jam sessions, like sprawling through this material with no pauses for like 2 hours in such a way that if you're not familiar with it, you can get sort of a bit lost in it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a cool entry point at the same time. Yeah.
My parents just took me to see like Motorhead.
Oh yeah.
Oh, well.
Well.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're burying the lead there a little bit.
Burying the lead.
Well, how old were you?
How old was I didn't know. How old could I have been? I don't know. Maybe like 11 or 12, maybe. I'm not sure. Time just kind of blurs at that kind of age for me. I don't know why.
Yeah, no, I think about probably a lot of people are like, I'm definitely like that. Like I was 8 years old and then I was 15. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's but like, did you have any idea who they were?
I don't know. It's just loud is what they were.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I had like no idea really.
I have this I don't know like if this is just but like between like them and Maiden or whatever, like I didn't know if there's like a if there's a huge like this is a rite of passage, for people whose parents like heavy music or because that I mean I can't think of a couple bands that are more legendary in that style, from the UK. So yeah, it was just loud. was music not really doing a lot for you at that point in your life? Or
No, like I loved it. Like I
oh,
was
you loved it,
like,
but it was just loud.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
in like I hadn't really kind of like I could just be misremembering. Like I'd always been kind of like very uh very kind of like captivated by music. To be honest, I think there might be apocryphal actually. Like the I think my I think my folks might have taken me to see this acoustic guitar player called Tommy Emmanuel before Motet even, and apparently I can't remember it that well, but they always say that I was kind of like very taken by it. And before that, I kind of like like playing guitar stuff when I started doing guitar when I was in primary school. So I'd already kind of like had like I would already kind of like was very kind of taken with that and thought that it was really cool.
Yeah.
And like uh, yeah, you know, I mean, just kind of and like music classes I really loved, and then whenever they're like, I just remember kind of like I have like kind of quite a vivid memory actually of like there was a time kind of like shortly after my like parents separated where kind of like my mum was living in a like bungalow. Like I was living with my like primarily living with my mum in a bungalow for a while, and like I just remember kind of like because my mum would always like kind of blast music quite loud, and I think I'd like gotten some CD or something, and it just kind of like I don't know, like whatever kind of it was. I, it was just some kind of like pop music or something of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like smashed it in like CD player and just kind of like cranked up and just kind of like, you know, just kind of jumping around the living room, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it always had like kind of quite a strong attachment to music in that way. So it's always been kind of like quite something that's given me like a lot of like it's done a lot for me, given me a lot of kind of like energy, and find it kind of very rewarding.
Yeah.
Oh, there's kind of like one of those things, I guess, isn't it? Where it's kind of like when you start kind of like going down like this kind of path with the thing, you can just start to become kind of more passionate about it in like both directions, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that, you know, you mentioned the acoustic guitar performance that you saw, and you know, I couldn't help but maybe like make a connection there, which like I never really thought of before, which is like, you know, all my kids have always almost like instantly gravitated towards like acoustic guitars, and I wonder if there's something there that feels more accessible to people at a younger age, because like you look at it, that's the whole thing, right? Like you don't
Do
have
you,
to plug anything else in, you don't have to
yeah.
ask anybody for help, like that's the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if that's, you know, if that's a subconscious thing that you know, people think, like where it's just like you see it and you can just literally grab it and start making noise. And maybe if that's, you know, a lot of people are drawn to drums first, you know, a lot of
I,
kids,
yeah.
and
It's,
it's kind of the same thing, right? Like
yeah.
it's like you
And
see it, you
it's
go
funny
for
that
it.
you say that, like, because I remember like um, before I don't know how I remember this, but like before doing any guitar stuff, like I remember it must have been kind of like year 3 or year 4 or something in school, and like there was this like instrument kind of sign up sheet that went round, and I was like, oh yeah, the drums, I'll do the drums, and but the sign up sheet was full, so it's like, oh, I guess I'll do the guitar,
And
and
are
then
can you play
here we
drums at
are,
all at this
like
point, or no?
No,
No.
no.
Okay. I didn't know if that was like, because I heard a little like laugh in the background, so I didn't know if that was like, yeah, like and you're shit at drums now, or like,
I'd never say that.
I still think that they're like probably a lot cooler than guitar, but I just am very like, you start your way down a path, and then it's just like
yeah,
you start to learn how to express yourself, and it kind of just turns into a different thing.
yeah. Well, as someone that can
But
do either one, like at a mediocre level, I can't decide. I can't make up my mind. Like, I think they're both awesome. I get different things out of playing them, respectively. Like, so yeah. I don't know that like. I'm not even sure what society thinks is cooler at this point. It feels like when I was growing up, it feels like the guitar player was like, oh, that's the guitar player, like that person writes the songs, that person, but I think
I have some problems with that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, because I think that like as like not necessarily as a society at whole, but I think a lot of people are now familiar with like a lot of different songwriting, like I don't know, like practices or just like
sure.
there's, I mean, there's like Rush and the drummer wrote all the lyrics and people generally know that, and then there's like
Right.
like plenty of instances where like it'll be maybe like I want to say like that like that Less Than Jake, I think that ska band, I think that drummer writes a lot of the songs or did. I'm not sure if he's still in that band, but like I'm just trying to say, like, I think that more people know that it's not just one person writing, the song.
I think that's the thing that's important. Yeah, it was kind of like, I feel like I can, like I maybe kind of left it in the way it seems a bit harsh. I feel like, it's kind of like one of those things where I feel like there's a certain kind of like thing with guitar, I guess, where it's like, there's a certain kind of like, it's easy to kind of start there because you have access to kind of like, it's kind of like, it's quite well trodden to have kind of like access to kind of some of the various different kind of tools that can kind of start to kind of get things in motion.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of like, I feel like, and this is kind of like maybe kind of like interesting to kind of like talk more on maybe, but like, this kind of, I feel like something that I kind of like started kind of gravitating to more and more in music as I kind of like sort of kind of went through my teens or whatever, was kind of like more and more of the instances that I could find where it was kind of like increasingly apparent, either through like the band dynamic or just through like the form of the music, that it was kind of like that this wasn't just kind of like I'm the kind of like as you kind of put it, like I'm the guitarist, I write all the songs kind of music. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Where it's kind of like where like you're kind of saying is things might kind of start here or start somewhere else, but then it's kind of like there's kind of more of this kind of like deliberate collaboration or this kind of interaction between these elements that's kind of like a bit more kind of interesting and kind of interwoven.
that's like a sense that I got very quickly when we started doing things together, because like before we'd really like decided like we were gonna do music together like explicitly. I remember went over to like the flat that you had with my like really super like cheap set of like electric like drums, just like a bunch of pads on like a sort of a rail or something. Like, and you already had like these 5 songs written on the guitar, and it was really just like, okay, well, I'm just gonna play these songs, and I was just like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna play to them. And the things that I was just doing a lot of the time was like, well, I'm just gonna do like loads of like blast beats and double bass all over this stuff.
Yeah,
because I didn't have any like reference point whatsoever at that
that's
time.
The thing. Yeah,
because in like this would be like 2014, let's say. I didn't have any reference point. I hadn't listened to like a note of like math rock or like Midwest emo, any of this stuff. I just been on like a huge like trip on like black metal, death metal, all that stuff.
I feel like I would get the same thing out of like a lot of the like tech death stuff that I used to listen to as well. This is kind of why I started getting like some of the stuff. Some of like that's obviously kind of like a lot more like there's like a bunch of it that were kind of like not kind of do it for me now, is where it's kind of like everything kind of feels a bit more like subordinate to the guitar. It's like there's a guitar part and it feels like the other parts have then been written to that in quite a way where it's like, well, you just got to match this. But it's like there's kind of like other stuff. There's like some of this kind of stuff was kind of like a bit of an eye for me, kind of like, oh yeah, you've got all of these kind of different things doing kind of like crazy stuff rather than just like oh yeah, you've got like 3 people in a backing band and then like a guitarist that's just kind of like doing like a 25-minute solo and then walking off the stage or something, you know?
Yeah. But what I was going to say was, it's kind of like when I started just doing that spontaneously, your just reaction was just like, well, great. Like, do you want to blast all over this stuff? You want to do just exploring whatever you think is cool, and that's great. And not really like coming in with like a sort of sort of configuration of like, oh no, that's the bit where they need to pay attention to me. So you need to draw back the accelerator on that bit or any of this. It's kind of, so yeah, it felt very instantly like a sort of like, okay, great, we're just going to like run off into whatever is kind of sounds good. And that's going to be the thing.
No, that's kind of like what I kind of really like. A lot of the music that was kind of like, just kind of like, I've been kind of like sinking my teeth into for like a few years at that kind of point. Like I've been like, that's kind of like what kind of really kind of gotten me into it. It's just kind of this kind of sense of like these kind of like typical like kind of ways that things might kind of relate to each other, or kind of like the roles that they might kind of occupy in the music, just kind of being kind of challenged and kind of subverted, and like like just a lot of that kind of stuff. Like I just kind of that really excited me at that kind of late teens kind of years or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I mean, people are gonna, have already heard like a little clip or, whatever by the time, they get to this part of the conversation. But it's like, demcats is definitely the kind of band where you can hear it and you instantly can recognize that a springboard for the ideas can come from anywhere. And I think that's super interesting, because I do, like in my band, we don't live I live in the Midwest, and the drummer lives on the West Coast. And we write a lot of stuff like I will just send guitar parts with some scratch drums on them, but then also I'll just be like, hey, give me six songs worth of drums, and I'll write guitar parts on that. So we do a lot of that as well. And it's interesting to take a minute and like just see how writing where I'm writing guitar first leads to a more structured or rhythmic based like set of ideas, and then when I'm writing to drums is a more reactive and like almost like it feels more spontaneous. And that's probably just a bit of that is because I didn't work the parts out a million times in my head before I even put them on guitar, So that's got to be like some of it. But you know, and it's just very exciting. You get something brand new, you have no notions of it, and you just start going. Like you said, you know, you both were presenting these ideas to one another, and just nobody was saying no, and it was just like, okay, this is fun, you know, this is great, this is what this should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, before you all started this band, and we'll get to, you know, that, but like, you know, y'all have been a band for a while, but I'm assuming this wasn't either of your first bands. Like, what kind of bands were you in before demcats?
Oh, like, do you want to go?
Sure. Well, I guess, I mean, probably a lot of the really formative kind of experiences actually happened quite early on because I had like a music teacher. Because weirdly, I learned to play saxophone for a while when I was like maybe between the ages of like 12 and 14. No, I've never let you see me play saxophone. So yeah, that could have been a very odd timeline to be on, but it was not to be. We're in this one now.
Did you do pitched percussion as well?
I did do a little bit of timpani, a little bit of xylophone, but not really. It was just all about the drums, where you don't have to like learn, memorize anything, you just smash stuff. That was the important thing. Like but yes, but I had this music teacher who like, and I just like, she had a little kind of sort of group of her students that she just got together, and like there would be like me on like a tiny little electric drum kit, and we had like a clarinet and maybe a piano and maybe someone singing, just doing really simple like sort of jazz standards. And this music teacher just said to me like, oh well, why don't you try just like never really playing the same thing more than like one time, like just not really doing any repeats. And that just like completely blew me away in terms of like just completely changing the way like I was like thinking about like drums, and just being like, oh well, without just making it into a drum solo, you can just have this thing constantly just kind of like internally having a little sort of conversation with itself, or like just having these little kind of bits of kind of interaction, communication with the other instruments, just like all the time, just going on and on.
I feel like that's kind of like, yeah, I mean, you know how much more how much more I prefer that kind of dynamic of music, where it's kind of like where you just have that kind of like, well, it just kind of feels a bit more real. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe I shouldn't be kind of like normatively loaded in that way. It's just my personal preference, but kind of like, yeah, just things that kind of actually have that kind of sense of kind of responsiveness and kind of interplay with the other things, rather than kind of like every time you want to do like a thing, everything else needs to kind of stop.
Yeah. And then kind of after that, in university, I mainly did kind of a mixture of some like metal bands, and had one group that was kind of like sort of like a sort of slightly jazzy like jam band. But yeah, mainly kind of metal stuff, not really that comparable for the most part to demcats, to be honest.
For me, like there's kind of like various different kind of phases, I guess, where like, because I feel like guitar's kind of been something, like, as I was saying, something that I've kind of always been doing. And then I kind of got, in retrospect, what seems like kind of quite lucky from like a musical perspective with some of like the year groups that I was in school, where just kind of a lot of people were doing a lot of music. So it'd just be kind of like playing with these people a lot, like and kind of, you know, you'll have your kind of like little like high school bands that kind of do some bits and pieces that you get excited about and turn into like a bigger deal in your mind than is actually kind of connected to reality in any way. And then yeah, sort of towards the end of that, like I was like played in this tech death band for a couple of years. That was really fun, and like but kind of sort of at the same time as this, I remember going to see. I guess maybe sort of kind of bringing it, well, not full circle, but like I went to kind of see this kind of acoustic guitar player at like the Norwich Arts Centre or whatever where I grew up. Like just this acoustic guitar player called Eric Mongrain, who was kind of like who really kind of captured my imagination at the time because it was kind of like playing the instrument in a way that I sort of hadn't really like seen people do before. Where it's kind of like at the time it was all kind of like it was kind of like managing to like construct these kind of like full like worlds just as like this one guitar and like and it was kind of like the first kind of experience I had of someone just kind of like having all of these like alternate tunings between like every song or whatever, you know. It was kind of, it was also kind of like quite chill, like quite chilled out, like but kind of like quite kind of very virtuosic kind of playing at the same time. And I just remember kind of sitting there being like sort of having more of these kind of like having been kind of like spending a lot more time practicing these kind of like metal chops or whatever, and or like getting into all of this kind of stuff and like just being like, oh wow, I need to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Would you describe it as like sort of a percussive playing? Like, was it?
There was a bit of that.
Yeah.
There was a bit of that. I think the thing this person got like because they got really famous on the internet at one point for doing kind of like the thing where they like put the guitar on their lap and then like kind of play it in quite a percussive way like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the stuff that kind of got me much more was just kind of like the way they'd it was kind of this kind of thing that I guess Zoe was gesturing at as well, of like the way they would kind of mix up their kind of harmonic and melodic playing into this kind of like something that was kind of much more kind of tapestry like, rather than kind of like, oh, we're doing the chord bits and then we're doing the shreddy bits and then we're doing the like riff bits or whatever. It was much more like, it was just much more kind of fluid, and I just thought that was really cool. And then that kind of like led me into like kind of checking out a bunch more stuff like that, which I kind of like I guess is kind of like, in a certain sense, kind of quite similar to like a bunch of the way like some of the like math rock people will play guitar that I kind of like started gravitating to at a similar kind of time. So it was just like a bunch of this kind of stuff that was like that's just kind of like a really interesting way of approaching the instrument that I hadn't really thought about before, you know.
Yeah.
And then kind of at the same time as that, like I was also kind of like, it was kind of like the mid 2000s, so it was like, well, I mean, yeah, I don't know, it just had like so much cool new music or music that was new to me, where I was kind of like, on the one hand, like I had some friends that were kind of like getting me into this kind of like interesting like or what was kind of seeming a bit more underground at that time, like kind of singer-songwritery stuff that was kind of like quite atmospheric, that I kind of got quite into. And then I had like another friend, my friend Neil, who was kind of like showing me like, or we were kind of like listening to like a lot of Don Caballero and like like Owls and all of the like Kinsella stuff and like Midwest Pen Pals and all of this kind of stuff that was kind of like floating around at that kind of time. And then like from that, obviously kind of getting into merchant ships and like a bunch of the kind of like more kind of screamery stuff. So yeah, it was kind of taken by a lot of these kind of things, and like we kind of like have little kind of like different like personal projects that I was kind of like working on, where I was kind of like just emulating all of these different kind of cool things that I was discovering, being like, oh, here's like Bonnie there doing like some kind of like crazy like falsetto singer-songwriter stuff that I'm going to go and write like an album's worth of that I'm just going to keep on a hard drive for myself forever. And then like my friend like showing me like Piglet, and I'm like, that's the best thing ever, like I've got to do that. And that, I mean, that turns out that ship is the one that I kind of stuck to a bit more, but like and then there's kind of like people showing me like Tony Danza or something. I'm being like, wow, that's mad. I've got to do some like intense like metal stuff, or whatever, like
Yeah.
yeah, and just kind of there was also kind of like a lot of kind of cool like underground metal stuff that I'd be into that would come through Norwich, like that was like so I kind of like got kind of like quite into that kind of scene as well, and just a lot of stuff like that was kind of
that was the time for it too, because it was like
exactly
really
right.
all of a sudden you can access all of this for the like it had been building up to that point to where it's like early to mid 2000s where you're like, oh wait, you can just listen to all this like whenever you want. You can just like you could just go down a rabbit hole of bands that you've never heard and just never stop.
Tell me about it.
You still can, but it's like that was the thing was this. And I mean, like I still kind of feel like that, like where I'm like, oh, and then I got to do something like this, and like I'm constantly just in a hole of like there's 3 albums that I've written that aren't finished yet because because I'm I'm just trying to finish the other one, and I don't know, it's a good problem to have, as far as problems go.
No, definitely. It's I feel like that is kind of like that was kind of like the time where kind of like it was kind of like the major kind of fork for me off into kind of like way more kind of like weirdo music. Do you know what I mean? Like just kind of like there's much more kind of fractal and kind of like niche stuff. There's just like there's just so much here. Like I was just like, this is so cool. Yeah. Like you say, just a really good time for just kind of like just suddenly being able to access all this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So as we sort of hinted at earlier, you all did get started quite a bit ago, but your first LP was just released this year, or last year. Late last year. I'm still like in 2023 mode.
Same.
It's not going to be 2024 until like March for me or something. But,
at least.
Yeah,
at least.
But like
when's your first show?
February 3rd. So
okay,
yeah.
But that's not quite 2024 yet. That's still a 2023
yeah,
show.
no, not really until probably around my birthday. Then I'll be like, oh yeah,
got it.
We're here. We're in this year. But
all right.
Yeah, and plus I just until that show I just really have my head in the sand, like working on a bunch of things. Like that show is like a deadline for me for a lot of reasons that'll be obvious by the time this airs, but it's just like you all had been working on this album in particular for a while, but even before that, I think that I saw you all started working on it around 2020. Is that right, or is that did I read something wrong?
I wish we started working on it in 2020. No, that's kind of like what was 2020 the hinge point? Is it like a lot of the material, like a lot of the material was actually kind of written and kind of in one form or another kind of like tracked for the most part, or kind of, so like Zoe was saying, I kind of like was working on a bunch of these guitar parts kind of throughout university, which kind of concluded in 2014.
Okay.
And like and then after that, me and our old bass player Dan moved into a flat together and like started playing with Zoe, and kind of we kind of like developed a lot of the material on this record kind of way back then.
Maybe it was like that you started recording in 2020. Was that right? Or
I feel like 2020 was when we thought it was about to be done.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It's that kind of project.
It's one of those.
I was trying to go through, and I was like, and I was like, okay, there's a show on here from like 2016, and like look, when people listen to this album, like they're gonna understand why this, took time. Like they're gonna
Yeah.
get it because,
Oh, thank you.
like they're like what Zoe said about the 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 drum beat having its own conversation, or however she had put that. Like,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
that's the kind of thing. Like sometimes I'll be working on something that's like drums first or something, and I am thinking to myself, I don't know if I'm just not getting this or if there's something like structurally wrong with it. Like if that
Right.
makes sense. Like I don't know if this is like if the like sometimes I'm like if this was a little tighter, like I would get it, or am I just not getting it because I just don't get it, right? And that's like when you are approaching music in a way that I feel like the two of you are approaching it, I feel like there's a possibility for a lot of like rewriting, a lot of like, well, let's try this instead. And so
Uh-huh.
the fact that this took as long as it did makes total sense to me. But like,
Right.
are there times when it's just like that either one of you can relate to what I was just saying, where it's just like, I just am not getting this?
Um, when you say you're not getting it, can you like
Yeah, I'm
elaborate a
trying
little
to
bit? What do you mean?
like
Like,
like if if Zoe starts playing something over what you're
yeah,
playing,
yeah, yeah.
is there an aspect to that sometimes that's like there's a learning curve to where you're like, I have to figure out how what she's doing works with what I'm doing, or vice versa?
I feel like, well, in some ways with this record is a slightly, maybe slightly unusual situation, maybe not, of like already from my perspective, there already being all this material on guitar, which for the most part ended up being kind of preserved. But I guess from my perspective, coming to it,
There were like a number of parts where
there was
where
some changes. There were some
because
changes.
this was kind of like sorry, I would try not to derail things too hard, but like just like there were definitely like quite a few parts because this was like when I was kind of like, oh yeah, like was kind of quite getting like kind of quite excited to be kind of like working on stuff with you. It was kind of like when you kind of like, nah, this bit like that's just kind of like super basic. This bit that's kind of boring. This bit needs work. I was like, yeah, sick, okay. And then we're like, I mean, maybe that's like maybe kind of slightly rose tinted goggles. I don't know, like, but it's like that kind of relationship where it's just like you kind of like if you had like a thought that kind of like certain bits weren't kind of like quite stacking up or weren't quite giving you kind of what you needed to do something interesting with, then it was kind of like, okay, well, I can sit with that for a second and go and wait. And I remember because like there was one kind of like set of practices where we kind of there was a certain kind of part where maybe like a bit stuck or you just kind of like not really stoked on it, and it's kind of and kind of went back to the flat like and just kind of like cranked out this kind of like thing, kind of brought it back and you're like, oh no, that's cool, right? So yeah, they're like yeah, just like that kind of little interjection, like just of like the history.
So I am somewhat to blame.
Yeah, like yeah, okay, yeah.
But no,
It's just
Yeah.
it's a lot of back and forth sometimes then. Yeah, which
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense to me. Like it's and what you were saying before about the drums being very fluid, like I feel like yeah, that's the biggest thing that I sort of take away from a listen through on the album is like this sort of like manic fluidity. It's just like
Yeah,
I don't know like where this is going necessarily, but it's like
right.
it's all it's all like heading in a direction that seems clear even if I don't understand it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
And I think that kind of thing is like I think that
It honestly makes me so happy that you said that.
it's the kind of thing I feel like it's challenging to some listeners, and I enjoy that a lot. And I don't
Right.
know if you've ever like, are there shows that you play or whatever where you play with bands that are nothing like y'all, where it's like you're clearly like you're not resonating with people because you know, I'm not trying to put words into your mouth or anybody, or I'm not trying to like seem like gatekeepery, like oh, people just don't get it, or whatever.
Cheers.
Like not everything is for everyone. So like that aside,
Yeah.
what kind of experiences do you have like as far as like playing shows where like I can't imagine it's like you show up and the bill is all bands like y'all.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like, what I was going to say before about writing drums kind of connects to this, because I think like the thing that was kind of the thing that I kind of grappled with a bit more than just sort of like understanding the material in some kind of like technical sense was a bit more like, okay, well, how do I like find the right energy and like atmosphere for this?
Yeah,
how do I like make these parts feel a certain way that I want to feel? Like I kind of relate to like there's like a drummer for a band called like 1349. It's like this Norwegian like black metal band. There's this interview where he talks about like I need to like really kind of find like what he calls the red energy is his words. Like it's kind of this feeling of like this roaring, like intense kind of like. And I mean, if you listen to 1349, you'll probably be able to say, okay, well, I kind of understand what he means by red energy, but it's kind of like it's quite different in that atmosphere to what we're doing. But it's kind of this roaring, kind of intense kind of feeling. So it's kind of like. And I think when it comes to playing stuff live, I feel like it's true that we have ended up playing alongside a lot of music that's in a certain sense not really very much like what we're doing. And perhaps on paper, you might say, oh, well, maybe people won't get it. But I feel like part of what I try to like kind of sort of bring into, I guess, playing the material is like trying to bring a lot of like physicality and a lot of like energy to it in the performance rather than kind of having a very kind of like clinical kind of performance style. So try to really kind of make people like feel the energy that you're kind of trying to pour into this. So they might not kind of, so if they're not familiar with the material, maybe, it's understandable they might not kind of follow it in a kind of like really, it might not be super clear to them, like exactly what's going on in a certain sense, but really, I feel like you should be able to communicate like, okay, well, this is like the shade of this thing. This is the energy that we're really going for. This is like, is it like furious? Is it like despairing? Is it like ecstatically like exploding? Whatever it might be. That's the thing that I think try to like actually kind of make happen in these performances if possible. And I think that kind of helps it to actually kind of translate in a live context in a way that maybe some like stereotypical imagery might have of something like tech death sometimes might not, because it doesn't necessarily have like an atmosphere that's super compelling all the time.
I feel like this is kind of sort of similar to the way a lot of the kind of like approach, kind of like taking when writing the guitar parts in the shoe, where it's just like very like kind of like. I feel like, Edie, I've heard you speak to people before, maybe about like, kind of like music that has like a certain kind of like a very kind of like earnest kind of nature to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like very kind of like sincere.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I feel like this is kind of like a lot of the music that I like is kind of like this, has this kind of like quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this kind of like drives like a similar kind of like, so I feel like I kind of like approach things with this kind of attitude a lot, where it's like, it's kind of like there's something that just needs to kind of like come out of you, and it's all kind of like quite intuitive and emotionally driven. And I feel like, obviously, like you're saying, it's kind of like that's not for everybody, but I feel like I don't know, maybe to kind of like build on what Zoe was saying, that maybe kind of like sometimes like if people can kind of like see that there is that kind of like kind of emotional outpouring happening to one degree or another, like, or it's kind of like the even if it's not kind of like really their thing, there's kind of something to connect to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we've got a friend like like a friend up here in Sheffield who's kind of we were visiting another friend the other day, and they kind of were like, oh yeah, like a friend kind of like they listened to the record and they were kind of like, oh, like I'm so disappointed that it's not the thing that I like. but I can see that. But I can see sort of like. But they were like at the same time they were kind of like, oh, but we feel like the time you put in kind of like is reflected in what's come out or whatever. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. That doesn't really kind of answer your kind of question.
No,
Really.
we went a lot of
I feel like
places
maybe
there,
we've been
but
quite lucky as well. Like with some of the shows that have been on, because like a lot of like kind of the like initial kind of bit of touring that we did back in like 2015 16 or whatever, like was with kind of stuff that was kind of loosely tangential in some way. So yeah, it wouldn't be kind of like, oh yeah, stuff is like you know, like all the other bands on the bill are kind of like quite similar, but there was we were kind of like in the kind of like cluster of like weirdo music where people are just going to kind of have a bit of an open mind, if you know what I mean, in terms of like the other bands that we're playing with. So like I feel like that's probably kind of like it's been kind of like a bit of a lucky experience, I guess.
yeah.
Rather than kind of sorry, I go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like I think that people that listen to like screamo or well, I don't know. I can't say necessarily like what people in the States would call like hardcore would necessarily
Right.
but like I feel like definitely people that listen to like screamo or post rock whatever would definitely
Yeah.
show up and they'd be like, yeah, this is cool, because like you
Sure.
said, they get that energy. That energy
Sure.
is the same, and yeah, which the energy is more akin to screamo and stuff like
Yeah.
that than even like you keep talking about like death tech or something like that. Like it's
Yeah.
more akin to screamo than that is, even though
Sure.
that theoretically should be more like screamo because it's super distorted guitars and low tunings and screams or whatever.
Yeah. Got you. Yeah.
So it's a closer comparison to me, anyway. But yeah, I just it's it's kind of a an off and on topic in the States where it's like mixed bills or no mixed bills, and
Right.
we had to do mixed bills in the early 2000s or whatever because there weren't that many
Yeah.
bands like our bands or whatever, and
Yeah.
and now we're back to where you could just do a all screamo festival or whatever, and they do keep happening,
Yeah.
and that's very cool. But like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
I think people just have
Actually,
a better like an open mind about it. Yeah.
yeah. No. Yeah. I wasn't going to interject with anything particularly interesting. I just saw. Actually, I discovered. Like I feel like I'm discovering cool new screamo bands like so frequently at the moment, but like found. I just kind of got kind of like served up by like the YouTube gods just this live clip from Scrams Fest yesterday of like this cool new screamo band that I'd never heard of before. Uh, uh, and yeah, I was just kind of like, wow, there's enough screamo bands for a Scrams Fest. That's sick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we only got to play like 3 shows last year, and 2 of them were like like 2 fests that were mostly screamo bands. Like, I think one of them was like pretty much all screamo bands, and the other one was like mostly screamo bands except for a couple bands, and it was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is wild. Like, I couldn't like when Coma Regalia started, like I couldn't
Yeah.
rub 2 screamo bands together in the same state, to save my life. But like, yeah. But yeah, it's like it's a great album. I hope that like the reception has been better than your friend. Like, but like I understand I understand the sentiment, I guess. But like, yeah, and like you know, we always like, we do these conversations, and it's like, it's always usually after something just came out, because like that's when the best
Right.
time to talk about something is. But there's
Sure.
always a part of you that, you know, it's like you got to talk about what's coming next too, you know,
Right. Sure.
and you all are probably like, we don't look, we're like, we worked on this really hard for a long time, and it's finally out. Like, leave us alone. But
Right. Right.
like,
No. Yeah. It's
what?
cool.
Oh, what are y'all's plans for like 2024? Like, is it, you know, are you always writing? Is it like, look,
And
we're just gonna
it's
play some shows and have
no,
fun?
it's funny that you asked this actually, because no, um, we went out to dinner with some people like a couple of days ago, um, and this kind of came up for one reason or another. I was telling them that like one of our friends came up to visit us um, sometime just before Christmas, just as we were kind of like pressing the big red like upload album to DistroKid button or whatever, you know, like.
Mm-hmm.
And he said like, oh yeah, so and like the process had been like pretty kind of full on for us for quite a long time, quite a big part of like this year, sort of trying to get various bits and pieces together. And he was like, oh yeah, have you like made any kind of like, what are you going to do on the day that it comes out? And and my response was like, well, I haven't really thought about it, but like, but you know, there's this kind of like this new material that I've been working on that I'm kind of just really excited to kind of be able to sink my teeth into a bit more. um, but I feel like that's kind of. Well, yeah, spoilers. No, I mean, spoilers for like 5 years time. So no, it's sorted, like, but it's quicker. But like, um, but no, yeah, I feel like that's kind of like a bit of a quirk of like how this record came together, where it's like because it was a bit kind of like the actual kind of process of getting it together was a bit kind of off and on and a bit kind of protracted as we kind of like gesture to like
Yeah.
there was kind of like a long period where we're kind of just waiting for some stuff to happen, like maybe back in like, I don't know, for me kind of like it was maybe like 20, I don't know, like the mid 2010s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're kind of like I don't think they'll be like offended to say, but oh no, so we can leave the drama somewhere else. But like, but yeah, no. Well, I was just kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to sit around and play around with some kind of like start kind of like making, you know, just keep writing. And kind of like started to get together some more stuff, and then sort of like took some time away from that to kind of start kind of like trying to finish the record off again. And then but then kind of like keep getting more and more kind of like influences from kind of like these kind of like weird little kind of corners of music. I'm like, oh, I need to kind of like, I just kind of feel really kind of like captivated and motivated to kind of do something with that. So there's kind of like a couple of bits that I'm really excited to work on with that, but like I don't know how much I should say.
Yeah, and
But
then
yeah,
and
yeah.
then also you just found out that Zoe can play sax and
Exactly.
timpani, and
Yeah.
so like
Finally.
And
Yeah.
there's a big horizon of possibility
anything
now
could
that this is
happen.
back in the public domain.
Yeah. But in the immediate term, though, as well, it's kind of like, although that's kind of like something that I really want to be spending more like time doing right in the very immediate term, I actually need to kind of like learn to play the parts again properly, so we can do shows, because that's something that we kind of like want to start doing a lot more this year now.
For sure.
So actually getting back out and kind of playing live again, because we sort of haven't done that in a little bit and kind of really missed doing it. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah. I mean, that's you know, the last few years have obviously it's been
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah.
been, rough to figure out like where everyone stands on playing shows and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
like it's just now starting to sort of be like, okay, like we can sort of navigate this. But yeah, like I could sit here and chat for a really long time, but like I don't have like a bunch of stuff that I need to ask or anything. Is there anything that we should talk about before we take off? I don't.
I mean, it depends how whether that was a polite. I could sit here and talk for a really long
Well,
time,
I
or
mean, it's just
depends.
yeah. No, it is like because I mean I could just start talking about something else and then we're gonna have this whole other conversation. But
Yeah, no,
I
like there was some things that we maybe kind of thinking could be that I was kind of interested to hear your take on, but
okay,
I don't
sure.
want to I, yeah, I don't want to like keep overstay our welcome or anything, you
It's
know.
not that. It's just like, yeah, if anybody's like keeping track, the last couple of episodes, like maybe 2 out of 3 are like 2 hours or nearly 2 hours. And I don't,
Right.
I don't ever want to do that thing where like I'm splitting episodes up and stuff, like,
Got it.
I don't expect people to keep up with the continuity like that,
Right,
but,
right.
yeah, it's just, I mean, if you have something that you'd want to ask, fire away, and we'll talk about that for a minute and then close it up. But if not,
Sure, yeah.
yeah, what was that?
Um, I'm trying to think what's like. I hadn't really thought about how to actually how to bring the subject up. I guess didn't I guess maybe kind of like spins off kind of like maybe some of the kind of stuff that we've kind of like vaguely kind of gestured at around like some of our attitudes towards making music, or some of the things that we kind of like find exciting, and like sort of kind of the sources of where some of this kind of stuff might come from. Because something that I kind of like think about a lot is kind of like, how some of these different kinds of things can echo in one way or another different kind of like political sentiments and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is kind of like spoilers. You asked about 2024. No, but like, what like one thing that kind of I think we mentioned to you that we were thinking of doing a zine at some point, right?
Yeah.
So like the kind of part of the subject of this, if we managed to get our kind of selves around to doing this, was going to be kind of like, like the importance of like trans art and stuff like this,
Mm-hmm.
and like queer art, and like yeah, kind of one thing that I've been thinking about is kind of like interesting. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on. It's just kind of like where you kind of have like if you kind of have like sorry, I haven't thought about how to kind of like launch into this kind of point, but it's kind of like so I guess kind of like a lot of the kind of things we kind of discussed that I kind of find sort of they've kind of like caught my kind of imagination like over the years of kind of like
Let me. I hope that I'm not interrupting your train of thought.
No,
But do
no.
you feel like, as a band that's instrumental, at least as of the time of the album, that
Yeah.
releasing a zine will help you say these things like in a clear voice? Like, do you feel like that's a part of what
Well,
you want to do, or is it?
maybe I feel like maybe where I'm kind of driving is almost kind of the opposite from this,
Oh,
in
okay.
a certain sense, where it's kind of, well, I feel like that's kind of very much I feel like there's because that's kind of like a kind of way where you can be kind of like quite explicit with things, right? Like a gesturing at.
Mm-hmm.
then something I've been kind of thinking about recently is kind of like when you have these kind of like kind of forms of art that kind of have like a certain kind of subversive structure in one way or another, how like sometimes this can kind of be the sort of like isomorphisms that this can have with like other kind of like political like structures or kind of like struggles or things like this. It can be kind of like it can almost act as like interaction with that kind of like art object, either as kind of like a viewer or listener or a writer, like or someone that's kind of doing like a doer maybe, like is like it can be kind of like a way to kind of like start kind of challenging certain ideas in a kind of like bit of a lower stakes way, if you know what I mean. So kind of like we kind of like talk a lot about like really liking music where all of these different instruments are kind of like really not confined to like their typical roles or whatever. And that just kind of like always kind of like being something that's kind of like caught our ears quite a lot. Like, and then similar from like a kind of perspective of kind of like genre and form. So I've kind of like been thinking recently, like when you have like these kinds of this kind of like music or these kinds of bits of art that kind of have this kind of like subversive form in one kind of context, to kind of like can provide a bit of an avenue for kind of people to kind of practice challenging those things, and so, or kind of like a kind of like relatively low stakes way of engaging with something like that. That then when there's kind of something that's kind of much more kind of embedded into kind of like the social fabric, that there's kind of like you kind of like have a bit of an experience of kind of engaging with something that's kind of done this in some kind of way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like
I think maybe it's not just saying like, hey, I want you to feel this way about this or whatever. It's allowing the person to engage with it on their own terms, and
sure.
which is, I mean, that's how, that is like, that is how we engage with music generally speaking, but like, yeah, it's different than like a Facebook post where you say like, this is about this, and like, you should, like, not that anybody's necessarily saying you should feel this way about this, but it's like implied at least, right? So this is like a way to sort of, whether it's like a story or whether it's just like, some thoughts or whatever, this is a way to sort of just be like, this is what this is, and you can feel the way that you'd like to feel about it.
For sure.
And yeah, I mean, that does like, that does like subvert expectations, especially, I mean, zines they're not like my zines are mostly comics, and not all zines are comics, obviously, but like there's, I think that a lot of zines that I've read, there is a sort of a comics-ish element to them, whether they're comics or not, which is like the juxtaposition of words and pictures,
Right.
And I think that's one thing that I specifically think is really powerful about comics, is like, we're talking about this subversion that can take place, where it's like you can be writing a you can write this really powerful like queer love story or whatever, and you can make the characters look like they're from Archie comics or something, and that's a subversion in itself of this expectation of like, this really like milquetoast, white bread, like group of people, like that, based on the way the art looks, So yeah, I mean, this doesn't exactly relate to the question, but I have been like a lot making comics, making zines. Like it takes so much time, right? And like
Mhm.
I think that like if you look into zines a lot, like um, on Instagram or or just YouTube or whatever, whatever you go to look into zines, that you might get the impression that it doesn't take a lot of time because there are a lot of
Absolutely
people
not. No, yeah.
that like there are a lot of people that like they'll do a zine which is like it's like one piece of paper and you fold it and so it's like eight panels, or eight
Right.
pages, right? Because it's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
one piece and and that's like really cool and that probably still takes a whole lot of time. But like
Yeah, yeah.
it I think that zine, like the fact that people are able to put out a couple zines a month sometimes is misleading because like it's just like, oh, that must be easy. But
Yeah.
it is like time consuming and like so where I'm going with this is like sometimes like I have all these ideas like musically or zines or whatever and just I'm up against a wall as far as like what can I physically in my life have the time to accomplish.
For
So
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes if
Yeah.
I'm doing like I did this one goofy zine and I thought it was really fun, but like I don't think it connected with people, and that makes sense because what it was is I thought it would be really cool to do this zine where I took characters that my kids liked, and I just
Right.
made like a locked room mystery,
Right.
and so it's this really goofy story, and it's got like a character from a video game, and it's got a character from Marvel Comics, and it's got uh, the well, it's got a few characters from video games, different video games. But
Sure.
anyway, like
Sounds like a litigation nightmare.
I mean, they can. I made 20 copies of it. They can come and get me, I guess, if they want to. But like my point is that I'm sort of like, there's all these trans stories that I want to tell. There's all these
Yeah.
whatever, and like, why am I wasting my time doing this, or whatever? And it's just like the thing is like, you know, I'm not the kind of person like I cannot just tell like this. I cannot tell one trans story after another. Like I can't do it. Like I
No.
don't have the spoons
Yeah.
for that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I need to just goof off for a minute because like
For sure.
like and so there yeah, it is tough because it's like and then there's like other things where it's like oh shit, like I made these zines that are comics about like cooking and stuff, and I just
Uh-huh.
like really like came I really like was like nobody like not like nobody cares, like people have picked them up from me and stuff and people have told me they enjoyed them, but it's like
Yeah.
why am I doing that when I could be but like there's actually I think there's actually something extremely valuable about like saying to people like read this comic book and you'll be able to make your own French toast or whatever it is. You know what I'm
Absolutely.
saying?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so like it's for me it's like it's part like yeah, like I need to move around my like artistic sphere or whatever corny way I want to put that. I need to
Sure.
move
Yeah.
around it to keep myself like
Kind of
from
renewed.
yeah, because
Yeah.
I can't just have a meltdown every time go to the drawing board, like because
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm telling about this really difficult personal experience or whatever. Um, and I think that I've come to realize that I need that musically as well because sometimes I just
Well,
I can
I feel like this is kind of like maybe like maybe kind of what I was like gesturing at in kind of one way or another. Maybe not exactly, but maybe kind of like segues a little bit where it's kind of like do you find yeah, kind of like like I was kind of like maybe gesturing at with like a bunch of the like kind of music that I kind of like started to kind of get really passionate about at a certain age. It's kind of like, this won't be kind of like necessarily like explicitly kind of trans music or whatever, but it might kind of have a form, like like the music might kind of have a structural form to it that kind of maybe kind of stems from a certain similar kind of politics, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of like, and there's kind of like there's kind of like something to that where there's kind of like, okay, well, like you've got this kind of thing where the bass is going up and doing this kind of like, it's mostly kind of like spending its time doing a lot more kind of melodic stuff, and the drums are always kind of really busy kind of interweaving, and like the guitar's kind of covering whatever, like kind of is kind of more fluidly mixing between like harmony and melody or whatever, like in a lot of, I don't know, like the Piglet stuff or whatever, where it's just kind of like, you can kind of take this and kind of be like, well, this is kind of like subverting these kind of like, kind of the roles that these instruments might kind of typically be kind of like confined to, and sort of like, in a similar way, you could like, you sort of like going through that kind of process of like kind of looking at that and kind of reevaluating like these kinds of things. Then when you come to kind of look at, I don't know, look at something a bit more kind of high stakes, you're kind of a bit kind of practiced at that. And there's kind of like a sense of like, okay, well, if I'm talking about like, no one's going to like hate crime me for like doing some melodic bass lines, but like if I'm starting to now kind of like take this kind of like pattern of like kind of thought and kind of like bring it into like gender politics or something, it's kind of like, it's a bit easier to kind of challenge that now, because I've had like some more kind of low stakes experiences kind of like looking at kind of role-based systems and kind of challenging them and being like, there's not really much here for me about this or whatever, do you know what I mean? It's just like, so I guess sort of like tying that into what you're kind of saying is, I feel like sometimes these kind of like things that can kind of have this form, like it won't necessarily be a form that's kind of explicitly brought in from the start, but it can be kind of, especially when art is kind of when you kind of process for making art is kind of a lot more kind of intuitive or kind of like emotionally driven. Sometimes this form can just kind of end up getting, or like forms that kind of have some of these kind of like echoes can kind of stuff can sort of just kind of get baked into what you're doing, if you know what I mean. Or like what's
no, I mean, I don't want to make a generalization, but like it's like I feel like I can absolutely tell when it's just like a band of 4 straight cis white guys. Like I don't know if that's what you're kind of going like, not that you're going all the way there necessarily, but like
more trying to go the other way, but
no, I just like, so I definitely do think there's an inherent reflection of the personal lifestyles or the politics or the just the inherent like queerness, transness, or whatever of the people involved. Like I do think there is an inherent quality to the art that comes out, and I find that extremely important. And like I think that one thing that I find funny is that I don't know that I'm not the most I know that I'm for sure not the most like, I don't experiment as much as I feel like I want to, like I always feel like I am sort of like holding back a good 25% or something, because there's instances where I'll really go for something and later I regret it. Like I'm like, I should have kept it safer, and I like, I'm happy if I stay more in my lane or whatever, right? But like but still there's that aspect to whatever I'm doing where I'll do something that I think is like is pushing against like some aspect of like the wall, you know. I'm like I'm
Got it. Yeah.
I'm doing something that's like, oh, if I just mixed something a certain way to where it's like a little antagonistic, like
Yeah.
in this way or the other, or if I draw something, or if the way I write something is a little like whatever. And it's really funny because like, you know, my wife, she's always like, you know, you you do this stuff on purpose, and then you're like, how come nobody likes it? And like, that's, you know, that's paraphrasing what she said, and that's also like
Yeah.
not exactly, you know, that's paraphrasing
No.
like
Yeah.
my own thoughts on it. But like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, like we're kind of like, yeah, I want to do something that's weird, like on purpose, and then be like, why do
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
think it's weird? Like, I don't understand, you know? Um, but that's part of the fun too, right? Where it's just like,
Yeah. For sure.
you know, like you said, you're trying, even if it's not obvious, you're trying to like subvert some expectation, or you're just like, you
Well,
know,
it's just that's what feels like the right thing to do.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like yeah, I mean, comics is like, there's such a, it's just like music where it's just like there's such an array of like presentation and material, you know, that it's just like wild.
Yeah.
But there are so many like uh there are so many, just like in mixing a record or something, these
Uh-huh.
ideas that people think are absolute, you know, like word balloons should be like whatever, or you know, or the 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 crossbar I should never be in the middle of a word in the typography, you know, or there's all these like absolutes, right? And like,
All of a sudden, you're like an animator for The Simpsons or something.
yeah,
Right?
and
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just like you just like like you like you're always like kind of like, oh, um like, am I just being a brat? Like, honestly, like, am I just like, because, you
Yeah.
know, you're just like, well, I just want to do it the way that I want to do, you know? So it's like, am I just being a brat? But like, at the same time, like, I don't know, just be a brat, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's your shit, you know? Like, just,
Sure. Yeah.
and that's, I mean, that's like all I can ever say. And I know that it's trite sometimes, but it's like, you're the only person that like can do what you're doing the way that you're doing it. Like, and if
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
means if that means breaking a rule that, and later on you like actually agree with the rule and you hate that you broke the rule, then like whatever, I
Yeah.
guess, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. No. I feel like I definitely just as I guess is like a like slight tangent, but I definitely kind of like feel your kind of anguish with that to a certain extent of like in a sense like, and I feel like this is partly why it took so long to get the record finally finished, because it's kind of like at the end of the day it's kind of like there are like the only real right answers are like, do I like it or not,
hmm
or like, yeah, you know, it's just kind of like your own kind of like opinion on things, but then it's just like sometimes you can get yourself into a headspace where that question can be quite difficult to answer.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
it's
then it
like,
can be quite emotionally fraught process, you know.
hmm and it's like, I was listening to a podcast about comics, but this advice goes just for anything, which is just like,
Mhm.
they were saying, they're like, if you don't do it, then it's not wrong. And that's like, in y'all's case, I didn't, you know, I'm not trying to say that this had anything to do with the length of time that, you know, it took to put together the record. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But like,
Right.
I have found personally, the longer something goes on, the harder it is to make those super small, like, just basically
Uh,
decisions. You know, it's just like,
yeah.
it's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
does the guitar need to be louder during that one part? Yes or no? And it's like, the
Uh,
longer it goes, the harder it
you
is to
don't
just,
you don't want to see the automation lanes in algebra, honestly.
right. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but it's just like, it's so true. It's like, if you don't do it, then it's not wrong. you know, because
Yeah.
it can live in your mind as perfect as long as you've not committed to that
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
so, really, like a lot of times it's like the I mean, I don't even want to know how many like just amazing albums or pieces of art or whatever that are out there that just never got finished because someone was too precious about it and it just didn't happen, you know?
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
a big that's a big reminder that I always have to give myself is like I'm just being too precious about this particular thing. I need to make a decision and I need to come to terms with it, you know? And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, we're we're here because we're all a bit romantic, right? In that sense
Yeah.
that like
Yeah.
we're like I want to create this thing that's like timeless or that really connects with people like me or, whatever
Or,
different
or it's
motivations,
kind
and
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or at least is kind of like, um, or that you feel at least kind of like, um, I was going to say kind of like reflects you in the way that you kind of want, but that's not really quite what I mean. I mean more kind of like, I don't know, that kind of like, yeah, just kind of has a certain kind of has the kind of like emotional resonance
hmm
that you kind of want it to have just
yeah,
for yourself.
yeah. And I mean, it's tricky. I'm not trying to say it's not tricky. Like obviously, I mean, but it's just like, yeah, the the longer you put off some decisions, the harder they are to make, and like, you know, um, it seems like in y'all's case, like you did have like the patience and like just generally speaking like the time to like let everything happen the way that it needed to happen. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
just like you might not, and so
yeah,
you have to just sort of steel yourself for a decision, maybe a bad one sometimes, but then like I don't know, hopefully you learn from it. But like
yeah,
yeah,
for
like
sure.
um I think that so much of art is just like it's that the until you start something, the possibilities are just endless, and like every step you take in the creation of something, the possibilities like narrow in a way, like whether it's just like this is the kind of guitar I'm going to use, or this is the format for the band, like bass, drums, guitar, like
Right.
it's, you're narrowing the possibilities like to a certain extent. And, like the possibilities are still like ridiculous, like no
Sure.
matter
Yeah.
what, but it's just like, yeah, I mean, if I decide this comic is going to be black and white, then I've just narrowed the possibilities. And that helps you to make decisions because you've taken some of these things off the board, but like still there's decisions to be made, and every time you make them, you get closer to, whatever the ultimate outcome would be. But like in one way, the decisions become more difficult, and in another, it's like there's less of them, so it's easier. I don't know. That's
I
like
think,
that's a totally different tangent, but like
yeah, no, I get it. It's like, weirdly, I feel like a lot of the time, um, when it comes to the actual kind of, I don't know if you get this kind of experience too, but with the kind of like the kind of music making part itself, it like always feels kind of very kind of natural, or it doesn't really feel like you're kind of like making decisions really
hmm
in like the same kind of extent. It feels a bit more like you're just uncovering this cool thing, or like you're doing a thing and it's just feeling very like rewarding. It's or like just kind of very like Yeah, like there was something that kind of needed to come out of you, and now it's coming out or something. I don't
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah, the
that's
decisions
maybe
could
like an
be
overly trite way of saying it. But then when it comes to like doing like all of the okay, but now I've got to like capture that.
yeah.
I've got to like well maybe I guess you don't need to, but like I mean, you know, if you ever want to make a record,
Yeah.
it's like just sort of taking that and kind of like freezing that in time in some way. I feel like this is where a lot more of the kind of like um the kind of like trepidatious kind of decision making kind of cascade starts happening for me. And that's
Yeah.
not to kind of say like, you know, I mean, I just realized sort of as because we opened the conversation talking about jam bands, maybe that kind of like sounded like a bit of a jam bandy kind of attitude. That's really not the way I approach like
Yeah,
doing writing. I feel like I'm kind of very kind of like meticulous, and I will like kind of take a little idea and kind of go over it and grow it and kind of like gradually build on it and build on it and have it kind of like be kind of very kind of like worked out in a certain sense, um, you know, with kind of like room for kind of like expression within there. But like I'll kind of just kind of I'll really enjoy that kind of process of finding this like kind of cool stuff.
yeah.
But
Well, when you're playing live and you're
yeah,
writing the songs and putting the songs together, it's like the decisions are organic, you know? It's like
yeah,
they're just happening. Like and maybe you do occasionally stop and you actually just say, okay, now 2 times instead of 4 times. I mean, that's a example of a decision that's like, you know, you're more like you've taken the time to stop and put words onto it than just
yeah,
like sometimes it's just like you don't even do that, right? You're playing it and the next thing you realize, well, we've played this 6 times, like this, you know, this measure 6 times, 3 times in a row without it ever actually having verbalized that.
yeah.
Um, so that's just like it's 6 times, you know, or whatever it
Yeah,
might be. So
yeah,
yeah, but then, you know, like you're saying, it's like those decisions in the studio or whatever. That's a that that's a different environment, and those decisions are obviously important and critical as well because, you know, like way more people have the potential to hear you than will ever see your band play live. You know, so like
sure.
um, it's
Well,
important, but it's like yeah,
maybe it's kind of like to do with the way that you're forced to confront it as well, because it's kind of like you're then kind of like having this thing kind of externalized from yourself in a certain way and then kind of thrust back onto you in a
yeah,
way. And like if you're kind of like responsible for all of these little bits in like between the initial capture and that kind of return of the thing to you, then there's kind of like, well, am I doing something wrong here? What if I
yeah.
changed this bit a little bit different? And it kind of becomes like this, like you're taking this kind of thing that's kind of very like, it's kind of like a feeling really, and then kind of like scrutinizing it in like this kind of way that's kind of quite an unnatural way to scrutinize a feeling. Do you know what? Do you know? But with the idea that there is like the best, like quote unquote, the best way to do that, to translate it from here to there or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of feels like hearing your own voice back, where it's like you're
Yeah.
like, that makes sense, but I don't know. You know, like
Yeah.
I get this, but something is a little bit.
There's something's gone wrong there.
Yeah,
Like that's not what.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, how do we make how do we how can it be that we can all be happy with the results here? You know, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I feel like uh the there's an aspect to like where it's like the longer you do it, the more you get comfortable with that. And then
Yeah.
but there's also like that there's that separation from when you first started doing this, like as a teenager or whatever, where it's like no matter what came back, it was amazing, right? Like
Yeah.
and so I feel like there's a reckoning that's sort of happening with me sometimes, where it's like the familiarity with the process puts me at odds with trying to reclaim that feeling of just like
I
no
see what
matter
you're
what comes
saying.
back, it's going to be amazing. I'm going to be so excited. Like the familiarity with the
Uh-huh.
process being like that I've done this like tons of times. And
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, the process can be long, and it's like I go through, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like however it's like that stages of grief thing with the recording, you know. It's like where I'm just like this is going to be so good, then I'm like this is kind of shit, and then I'm like wait, this is actually great, and then it takes all the way till the end of me just like fighting
Uh,
all these impulses and
yeah.
whatever, and then being like no, I think we did all right, you know. But yeah,
How do you feel
it's
about that? So yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
yeah.
I feel like because you do a lot of. Am I right in thinking that you do a bunch of production yourself too?
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
I've not played in the last like 10 years. I've not played on a lot of stuff that I didn't do most of the
Yeah. Right.
production on. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it's
It's it's a special kind of like self-flagellation, isn't it? Like
yeah, because you
it's like
can tinker
yeah.
with it endlessly if you
Yeah.
really want to, you know, and
I,
that's where
honestly,
a
you
lot
can't.
of those rules have to come from, because you can and you shouldn't, you know, just like you shouldn't
I feel like
endlessly, you know.
I can't count the number of times um, since we were on the 2020. It's about to be finished.
Yeah.
Like
What a
period.
blessed
What,
state of
oh yeah,
ignorance. Oh, it keeps it
those
goodbye.
those halcyon days.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
no, yeah, I can't recall the number of times sort of I've like sort of sat down in our little kind of rehearsal space slash like studio space. It's kind of like working on the record, like just working on kind of production bits, and then kind of like sort of being like super stoked in the morning, and then kind of coming back like and speaking with like Zoe at the flat like later on the day and being like, oh, it's just it's horrible. it's
Yeah.
it's all wrong. It's yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I just want to yeah. So I I feel you like that kind of yeah, that
Yeah,
kind of roller coaster. Yeah.
and like, you know, eventually uh you know what it does come down to is you know some decisions were made, and you've like hopefully there aren't like parts, you know, of the album or whatever that you're still like hung up on. I mean, I personally um I personally always have those things.
Right.
I don't talk about them because I don't think that
Right.
I don't personally find that constructive. Like I
Right.
think that people should be able to engage with what I've presented, and and I don't want to take anything away from anyone. I don't want to say like, well, this album could have been better if I did this like this instead of whatever, because like that you really would be surprised like what somebody's favorite song of yours would be. Like
For sure.
sometimes it's the one that doesn't make any sense to you. But
Right.
that's the way it is, right? And I don't want to sour anyone's connection with anything that I've created in a way where it's just like, wow, what you think about that favorite song is like actually wrong because I didn't do it right,
Yeah.
or whatever. And
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's like however somebody else feels like talking about like their art is entirely up to them, but that's just that's my philosophy on it. So it's like, yeah, hopefully after all that goes down, then like obviously you released it, so you're proud of it and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, there always is that like, well, I could have just if I would have spent this more time on that one particular thing and just brought that up, and and yeah, you can do that until you're in 6 feet in the grave. You really could.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's what
No,
it comes down to, making decisions.
I totally agree as well. It's like it's something that I feel like you kind of have to remind yourself a lot. It's like yeah, it's kind of like probably like a lot of your kind of like favorite things about like all of the kind of music that you like and all of the bits of production that you like are probably like all of the bits that the person that was working on them were like, oh, like I was really trying to go for this other thing and then just kind of failed and got this, like,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But to you, that's just like, well, this is like the best. This is like I feel like there was our same friend actually, or like we had another friend that was kind of like was working on some music like a while ago, and they sent us some bits to kind of listen to just like get like an opinion on. I was like, we kind of like discussed it a little bit, and I was kind of saying sort of a similar thing to what you were just saying, where it's like as like a listener, you're kind of able to kind of absorb something for the thing. I mean, obviously you bring yourself to it as a listener, you bring your own baggage to it,
Mm-hmm.
but you're kind of like engaging with it in a certain sense as the thing that it is.
Yeah.
But like as a like creator or whatever, or like that sounds like pompous or like overly grand. There's
No,
but
we're an
it's
hour
like
and
when
45
you're
minutes into this conversation. We're past, worrying about
like
whether it's
when
pompous.
yeah, or like, but
I know what
when
you're
you're
saying,
kind
though.
of on the other end, it's like you're bringing all of this baggage into it,
Uh-huh.
all of these, like you're kind of like saying earlier, like you have this this initial sense of like, here's all of the things that this could have been at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of like importing all of that onto like the thing that it is sometimes,
Yeah.
in a way where you kind of like it's going to cause you to
And
have a slightly
especially,
different kind of perspective. Yeah.
yeah, and especially if it's like a song you played a bunch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you're creating this amalgam in your head of all the best times you ever played the song. And also in there is your idealized version of the song. It's like you're creating this perfect amalgam, and like
It turns out.
you put down the best you can put down, and it's like like sometimes like every single part of that song hits your idea of what it should be, like except for this one thing, or whatever. And like you kind of just have to like, and sometimes you kind of just have to, okay, well, like it is
That's
what it is. But
that's a lot of discipline that I feel like I don't quite have at the
yeah,
moment.
no, it's like I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's like it's tricky, but it's like,
Yeah.
going back to what you were saying, like, I think that people do, absolutely. It's just like what you present them is like they're taking that as fact. Like, this is the album. And
Yeah.
like, if they also see the band live, then they may have that opinion where it's like, oh, like, as good as you think the album is, they're so much better live. Oh my gosh, and like,
Right.
that's obviously the that's how you want to leave people feeling, I think, and not the other way around. So I
Right.
think it's like, yeah, I think that, when you were talking about, like, you're trying to capture that, like, I think that's really hard, and that is a struggle that is completely understandable to probably literally anybody who listens to this,
Well, I feel like it's just one of those things, isn't it? Where it's kind of like, you know, I feel like within the kind of like area of music, so sort of like both kind of involved in, like you're kind of like saying, really, like, where it's kind of like you're kind of really just making stuff because it's something that you kind of wanting to make, or it's like very kind of like sincere or like earnest or whatever. Like, I feel like maybe it's kind of like there's kind of like a sense of maybe some kind of like the difficulty when something isn't quite right, when you're trying to record something or whatever, is just like, because maybe kind of part of the reason you're doing this is kind of like, this is just a way, like, and probably for a lot of people, like, the best way they know how to kind of like express themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like they want to kind of like be seen by other people through this, in a sense, like, want to kind of like have that kind of like emotional connection of like, I've expressed this part of myself and other people are able to actually see that. So when there's kind of something about it that feels like slightly like incoherent with that, or like that, where there's kind of like a rub there, it can feel like quite difficult to kind of manage, because it's like, well, sort of kind of big reason I'm doing this is to like express myself, but there's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, but like I feel like I'm not able to do that the way that I want, or something like this. And then it's kind of like, and then it feels like when someone's then kind of engaging with that, it's kind of like they're not really kind of engaging with the true expression that you wanted to make, or something like this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's kind of part of where like that kind of like quite strong sense of like internal like friction or kind of frustration or kind of like anxiety can kind of come from, where it's like, well, the whole thing that I'm doing is trying to get this thing out, but then it's like, but it doesn't look right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
No, it's
yeah.
I mean, it's tricky, right? Because, it's like you said, you really are holding this precious, and for good reason. But it's like, at the same time, like, you're a person, and
Yeah.
you're alive, and you're going to go throughout your life, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you're going to
Yeah.
you're going to say the wrong things to people,
Yeah.
and you're going to think about that later. You're going to regret something you said, or like, you're going to regret that somebody didn't understand what you meant by something. And I
Mhm.
think that you don't have to look at the art you create the same way. Like, nobody has to take anything that I say or whatever, when in regards to their art, like, just take it with a grain
Yeah.
of salt. But like,
For sure.
maybe it's constructive to look at it that way as well. It's just like that, like, you're gonna, like, you're gonna make all kinds of mistakes in your life. Like, why let the mistakes you make with your art be any different than like any of the rest of them? Like, you should, like,
Yeah.
or you can, not should, I shouldn't say should, but like, you can take it as a learning experience. You can take it as like, I have this thing that I say, which is, it's not going to be the last song I ever write. And like,
Mhm.
I mean, spoilers, one day it will be, right? But I won't know that. Like, I'll never know that. So like, you can't convince me I'm wrong, because I'll be dead and it won't matter. You can't tell a dead person they're wrong. So like,
Yeah.
it's just like, I just am like, yeah, it's not going to be the last song I ever write. I'm going to get what I'm gonna get everything I can out of what I did, and I hope that other people do as well. And I'm gonna take whatever I learned, and I'm gonna move on with it as far as that goes. Because like, yeah, I don't know, like other people might feel differently about you know that, and like that's understandable. Like it's each person's art is each person's art, and they can tool it and retool it as much as they need to where they're happy with it. But like at the same time, like I don't think personally, like if I need to go back and tread on the same sort of ground, that I've already like been through or whatever, then like that's also fine with me. Because like I like if concepts feel familiar from like one album to the next, or this or that, because I personally feel like I didn't hit quite what I was trying to hit, then like I'm sorry, like you don't have to buy it. Like it's all
Sure,
it's
yeah.
all it's free to listen to
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and you can be like, wow, I've heard something like this before, and like that's fair and that's fine. But like I guess I just wasn't done with that yet,
Sure, yeah.
and I think
Sort of
there's
connecting
something to
to
that too.
connecting to like I think you're saying a moment ago as well of sort of you go through your life and you kind of like make a lot of mistakes, and sort of have these kind of things where it's like, oh, like wish I'd said this to this person, or wish I'd communicated better about this here, or and you can sort of go over those and go over them in your mind over and over. But like I feel like sort of maybe kind of like kind of spinning it around in the kind of positive direction as well. There's kind of like, have you ever had this kind of thing where like, you might have kind of like said something to somebody, just kind of that you weren't like, so, it wasn't necessarily kind of like this big, that's not necessarily kind of really stuck with you in some kind of way, but then you might kind of run into them like 2, 3, 4 years later or something, or however long, like, and they'll be like, oh yeah, no, like this thing that you said kind of really stuck with me or whatever. And you're just like, I don't even really kind of like, that wasn't kind of, that
Yeah, and
that wasn't kind of like necessarily some kind of big kind of premeditated kind of thing. But sometimes like there are like these little things that that we kind of like say to each other that kind of, yeah, and so it can be surprising the things that do stick. So it's kind of like, and it's, I guess in a similar kind of way, it's kind of like sort of like you're saying earlier about like the
you don't know what song's going to be somebody's favorite song. That's kind of the
yeah, you
same
don't know which
thing.
which of the bits about your music that you think you didn't quite do right are actually going to be the things that someone like that really inspires someone else to do kind of something really cool in the future or whatever, or just
Yeah.
kind of, or even if it's not like that, just something that kind of means a lot to them in
Yeah,
one
they
way or another.
connected with, or
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, when we're talking about the technical aspects, like
Yeah.
it, and this is like this thing that like it might seem, like some of this stuff is really obvious, right? Like it's just, and we're like we were saying before, you take this at face value, and it's just like, for example, like one of my like top 10 favorite albums of all time, like
All right.
I won't say what it is, but
Oh,
but
you need to say it.
well,
Yeah, just
I
say
don't,
it. No, it's like
I won't say it. I'll tell
sure.
y'all offline
You
if you
don't
want to
need
know.
to. I
But
mean,
but like
I'm
here's
very
the thing.
curious. But
So like, yeah, I mean, I'll be happy to tell you. I'm not trying to throw anybody over to the bus. This is like the opinion that I'm having,
sure,
and
sure. Oh,
the
I see. I get it.
So
Yeah.
here's the thing: is like, I think personally, like it's one of my top 10 favorite albums, right? And I think that the way that album is mixed, like I have aspired to that level of like everything about the way that album is, I've aspired for
Right.
that. Like the last 10 years,
Right.
I'm like, if I ever made an album that sounded that balanced, that sounded that whatever, that everything came across the way
It
that
gave you that
album is.
feeling.
Yeah. I would,
Yeah.
like, that's it. That's the pinnacle for the way a band like this should sound. And
Sure.
like last year, that band remixed and remastered that album. And I was like, what? You know?
Yeah.
And like
Wow.
they're happy with it. They're incredibly happy with it. And I am not, you know? Like
Right.
I had everything I needed out of it, you know?
Yeah.
And they didn't. And
Yeah.
that just goes to, you know, everything that I was saying is just like, you don't know like what it is like that someone's connecting with, you know, you don't and like as a listener, you don't know what the artist was trying to get out of it. And so that's it's quite a unique relationship to be in, you know, where like you're both interacting with the same piece of work on like a very personal level and feeling some connection to it. And you know, it's very weird because, you know, you it's like, especially if you think about like cover songs or whatever, where it's just like you're like,
Right.
I've done a lot of cover songs and recorded them,
Mhm.
and it's like we've had like really positive like feedback and stuff from like the people who wrote the songs and stuff, but that's always one
Sure.
of those things where it's like you're like what if I just don't get this at all? What if what I think I get about the song is wrong, right? And the
Right.
artist is just like, but yeah, we all do like have that aspect of a piece of music where it's like the ideas that are just floating around like in the ether after they come out of the speaker, like they belong to us and us only.
For sure. Yeah.
And I think that's fine. I think it's fine to feel that way. Like I don't think it's fine to like to act on that impulse, you know, like how people feel like they are entitled to something, you know, or whatever. Like you already got what you were, everything you needed, right? You know what I mean? Like the art that came, that's everything you needed, and you can either like that or dislike that or, you know, whatever. But like I think it's fine that people, once it goes into their ears and into their brain, I think it's fine that people take their own interpretations with the sort of like the metaphysical aspect of it. I'm not talking about like, you know, white conservatives in America thinking that Rage Against the Machine meant like, you know what I mean? Like I'm not talking about stuff like that.
Both sides are death of the author, right?
Yeah, you're definitely wrong if that's, you know, if that's where you think that was going. But like, I just meant like as far as like, you know, the connections that you can make like emotionally or whatever, you know. It's there's no wrong answers as far as that goes.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Was again, I feel like it's sort of like a bit of a different kind of avenue of like the connection between kind of like the way people might kind of like start to connect certain things with like their like sense of identity sometimes, I guess. I feel like this is maybe kind of like can be a source of I wasn't quite sure whether you were saying this from kind of like the listener or artist side, but kind of like if you're saying like that kind of like you're saying you know, once something's sort of coming through the speakers and like you're kind of hearing it and having your own relation to it, and then like sometimes people having a sense of entitlement. But I feel like I didn't know whether you were saying that from like the listener perspective or like the kind of like artist perspective of like, well, no, you need to feel this way about it. But I guess from
It could
the
be
listener,
either, I guess, huh?
sure, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, from the
I,
listener perspective, it's like, what I'm saying, like, as far as entitlement is sort of, it's just like, what if it's like my example of the album that I absolutely love, and I don't care for the remix, like, I'm not
yeah,
entitled to, like, anything. Like, I don't, like, I'm not gonna, and that's why I didn't, like, name the album, because, like, I'm not entitled
sure,
to this band feeling this way about this
yeah,
album.
yeah,
Like, I'm not entitled to any of that. I can always still just listen to the other version that I prefer, so there's that. But um, like,
do you,
I
do
don't,
you feel like,
the
sorry,
artists
no,
did not betray me. And you know what
yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah,
Because that's the
yeah,
thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where
for
people
sure,
start sounding really entitled, it's like, well, this
yeah,
isn't
no,
like this, like I thought,
no, that, yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly what I was
Yeah. No,
like just travel with, kind of like you're saying, yeah, like I feel like there's sometimes kind of like, I feel like the way that kind of people navigate these kinds of emotions can sometimes be a bit like, um I don't know, it's kind of just interesting, uh, interesting the way they flow versus how maybe they should, where it's kind of like,
yeah, it can
um
feel a
like,
little like, to use for lack of a better word, like it can be a little toxic, just like,
yeah, yeah, or it's kind of, well, if you kind of like, if I'm just sort of thinking about the kind of pipeline of it, it's kind of like you might kind of have this thing that someone is kind of become quite attached to, and like, and in one way or another is kind of like wrapped up with their own sense of identity, right?
mm-hmm.
So then it's kind of like, if kind of that thing changes, or like the people that are responsible for that thing, if they do something different that this person doesn't like, it can like, it like becomes a bit of a challenge to their identity in some way.
Yeah.
And then kind of like, instead of kind of processing these feelings as kind of like, I don't know, like a sense of like, um disappointment, or kind of a situation where it's kind of like, you maybe thought you had a connection, you thought you maybe kind of like made this kind of like, I guess, sort of parasocial connection with another human being somewhere else, somewhat, like in some way, or kind of like, or just to this kind of like abstract kind of like art object itself is just kind of like, if this is sort of resembling you in some way, and it's kind of like, there's kind of like a separation anxiety from that, where it's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
well, there's a disappointment of like, oh, like maybe that's not quite, doesn't quite have all these things that I kind of like was holding on to, or it's kind of changing in this way that I feel doesn't resemble me anymore, or something like this. Instead of
Yeah.
kind of like just processing it for that, as that kind of like cluster of emotions,
Yeah.
instead it'll be kind of much kind of easier to kind of like just go into like a more, something that's kind of like a kind of knee-jerk defending your identity by kind of like, or so someone might kind of defend their identity by like, uh yeah, like you say, sort of more toxically like putting down this other party or whatever, just like talking like, yeah, yeah, kind of having these like feelings of entitlement, or like this kind of like sense of like, I don't know, yeah, like I can't think of the names for the right cluster of emotions. I don't know if you have like,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I know, I definitely know what you're saying about, like, separation anxiety. It's like, I like, to me, there's a big difference, obviously, when we're talking about,
it's kind of
like,
like mourning almost, right?
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's different when we're talking about, like, oh, like, this artist, like, they zigged when I wish that they would have zagged, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm not really,
But then
like,
you shouldn't necessarily be angry at them,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's more
right.
just, yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
I remember when I was like, I mean, I've been listening to all of this kind of stuff for, a real long time, and I like, uh am old also. So, like, so, like, I can remember, like, when I'm like a kid, like, and I hear, like, Minor Threat, and stuff, and I'm like, holy shit. And then I heard
Right.
Fugazi, and it wasn't like
Yeah.
they couldn't be further apart, right?
Right.
And I wasn't like, oh, this sucks. This makes me mad that this isn't like this or like that, you know? But like I but like there are people that like that kind of change in an artist's like catalog or whatever would be they I mean it was jarring, right? And that's like kind of
Sure.
what I liked about it. But like there are people that would upset, right? And
Uh-huh.
me personally, it's always just been like that's been fine, and I've actually really enjoyed that. But like, I mean, I can remember like the first time that I heard that Morrissey said something really fucked up. Like I can remember
Right.
that because I'm like that does that thing to me, like
Got it.
and that's like that's a totally different conversation, obviously that we're
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
like where that we weren't trying to have, which is just like, but it does evoke that same like sort of like you're mourning that part of yourself that you found connection with it perhaps in a parasocial way with this artist that like I mean I like I can say like without a doubt like that like so many things like made so much more sense to me about like my music listening tastes and stuff in high school, like when I like was like, oh shit, I'm like actually a girl, like
Right. Right.
because I identified with like like I identified with something about these bands that I was listening to in high school that were all girls that I couldn't
Right.
put a finger on, and I identified with the Smiths or the Cure in a
Right.
way that like I didn't like I loved Minor Threat, but I didn't identify with that in any kind of way that like was had the same meaning as these other bands. Like I loved Minor Threat and I loved Megadeth and Metallica, the old stuff because it was fast and I just like I wanted to go fast, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I always identified with that, like I loved that, but I identified with this other stuff in a way that I didn't understand. And so yeah, when it turns out like Morrissey actually sucks, then you're like
Yeah.
you do feel like you're like shit, and yeah, you have to reckon with that. Just like
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we're all people. We're gonna have to reckon with lots of things that are probably more difficult to deal with, unfortunately, you know, than just being like, well, I will either like choose to continue listening to this album that I've owned for like this physical album that I've owned for like 25 years and just like not support this person financially in any
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
shape, or form going forward, or whether you're of the other camp, which is just like I'm cutting them off, and like I'm not trying to tell people there are any wrong answers for
Smash
that.
my
It's
coffee machine.
yeah,
Got
it's but yeah, it's I don't know. It's like that's the thing about like about art. It's like I was saying before. It's like there's always tomorrow, right? Until there's not, and then when there's not, then like you won't even know it. So just
Yeah. Yeah.
just make some decisions and do your best. And yeah, I don't know. We're all having a good time. Hopefully, doing that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like these things aren't really like parasociality, really, though, because that kind of like the reason why it's called parasociality is because it's kind of seems like it's sociality, or it is in a sense, but there's something fundamentally kind of harmful or delusional in like some level about it. So I
yeah,
think this kind of relationship to music is like, I don't think there's really anything delusional about it in itself. It's kind of because these things and you kind of developing these connections to them in your life, it's like, well, it's because these things really are like forming your sense of self and your world and like what's important to you. Yeah, and like kind of like you were just talking about the way you kind of realize, oh, well, the reason why I connect to these things was actually for reasons that I didn't necessarily understand before, but now seems very more clear. It's kind of like there's these
yeah.
things really do, in a way that's not quite just parasociality. These things really do like form you and your world in a very real way. But I think the delusion or the harmful aspect doesn't really come at this point, but it's more the point of like, well, when things change, and they're necessarily going to change, how you're actually going to respond to that, whether you can go through a process of like accepting that and like mourning that, or whether you're kind of going to just cling on to it and be kind of like hurt by that.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mean to imply that every instance of this was, parasocial or whatever. Like there are,
Yeah.
like we've seen enough comment sections to where there are people that take that a little further, than they should, So like there, but like, yeah, most of the time what I'm, like what I'm just describing is like how I put it before, where it's like the idea goes into your brain and becomes partly yours, just like
Yeah.
it was someone else's before and will be someone else's long after we're gone, but that's sort of the beauty of it too, right? And that's also where that fear comes from, right? Because once we decide this is it, then like, oh, that's just the way it is for the rest, and I'll never get another chance to do that again. And but like, life is full of chances until it's not. And so,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
like,
I feel like sort of
Just wait until we get the remaster done.
just getting, yeah. Yeah. I feel like sort of tugging on that string again to bring it back around to one of the things we were talking about earlier. Yeah, I feel like this maybe kind of like in a certain way kind of like kind of highlights sort of the kind of like importance of the kind of like circulation of like certain certain forms of like art in like in the like just sort of trying to like do more to sort of like create like access to them or whatever, I guess, or just kind of like allow more to kind of exist, where it's kind of like so we sort of like just bring it earlier, if there's kind of like certain bits of art that you can start to kind of relate to in one way or another, like the role that kind of can have in both kind of forming and like both kind of like but both kind of like forming in the first place, like contributing towards your sense of identity, but also sort of helping you like understand more about yourself in other ways, in a way that's kind of like a bit safer than just like or a bit more kind of immediately private sometimes than just like, I don't know, like confronting certain things that I think I was saying earlier, just a bit more kind of like socially embedded norms. It's kind of like I don't know. Don't know how you feel about that.
yeah, I mean, I think I know what you're saying. I mean, it's that's a kind of like what we're all trying to do, right? Is like we're trying to make something that speaks to someone, and we're trying to like express this, this part of ourselves that was like difficult to express, and like ultimately we want to. I think we all kind of want it to be helpful, in whatever way that looks to us, like like if you make really angry music and like you just like, wow, I hope people like really rage to this so that like that gives them this like feeling of catharsis, or whatever, or like,
Sure.
oh, I hope this like story that I wrote like really tells these other trans people that like this shit's okay, or like, or I hope that somebody makes these muffins and they really enjoy them with their family, or their friends.
Yeah.
Like any kind of like those connections, and the way that we can like, I don't think that like like we want it to be profound, right? But it doesn't always have to be profound. And like you said, it can be
Sure. Yeah.
gradual. It can feel
Yeah.
easy, you know.
Yeah.
It can feel like nothing happened at all, but then you're like, shit, something happened, you know. And
Yeah.
I think that any way that a song or a piece of art, or like some words on a piece of paper or whatever, any way that any of that can be done is amazing. And I mean, that's why I have always been drawn to all this stuff that is just like DIY is just baked into it, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it tells people, like, you barely need anything to get going. Like, you just need to get going, and that's the thing. Like,
I feel like the other kind of like like sort of magical thing about like this kind of stuff to me as well, or like maybe that's a bit of a too like what like kind of wondrous way to say it, but like sort of starting to about kind of like DIY ethos and the kind of like DIY scene in general is just kind of like I remember when we started doing a bunch of DIY stuff back in our old flat, like almost 10 years ago now. Like you just kind of like start to get a bit of a realization where it's just kind of like, if you as I'm sure you kind of like for me, when you start kind of like putting stuff on like this yourself, or start making stuff yourself in this kind of way, and you start to kind of like introspect on that, and it's just kind of like, wow, like no one would know about this, and no one could have possibly like come to this thing, whatever, unless they knew this person who knew this person or whatever. And then it's kind of like, it just kind of makes you think, wow, there must just be kind of like this cool stuff just going on everywhere that you just have no idea about. Like how many like cool like how many people in their like early 20s in Sheffield right now are just throwing some sick house show that you just never know, like like or whatever, or like I don't know, like, and I don't know, that kind of sort of taking that kind of attitude on it for me just kind of really just kind of like opens the world up to just kind of being this kind of place full of so much cool stuff that you can just hopefully one day kind of stumble across,
yeah. Yeah, and I mean,
yeah.
that's like, I don't know, that's like the sort of like thing about art and music in general, right? Is like is there's always a sort of a duality, at least in my like life, where it's like, and this sort of relates back to that like idea of like it's perfect until you do it, right? Because it's like there's always this duality where it's just like things can, like, you can go and live your life every day, and it can be like your week can, from week to week your life can be remarkably similar, like, and it's sometimes like you can be like, wow, this is like mundane. But then at the same time, like, I can go on a walk and like I could be amazed at like every blade of grass, like and it's that vastness of the range of like the things that are happening, that could be happening, and like the possibility for things to happen that is like I try to hold on to that, because you don't, like, there are absolutely like a million really awesome things going on right now, and like I don't think that this conversation is like not one of them. I think like
sure,
there, of course there's going to be people that turned it off a long time ago, but then there's people that are just like, no way, like they're all saying something that I've like wanted to say for so long. And it's I don't know, like I just like, as corny as it sounds a lot of times, like, and I know I go through these conversations and say, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, which is just like, I just am so voracious. Like, I'm just like, oh, I got to do all the cool things, and I can't
Yeah,
stop.
yeah,
And um, like, yeah, it's just the possibilities, and just like the way that you can just not know anybody like whatsoever, and then be chatting with them for like 2 hours and be like, wow, like they get it,
yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. Like, um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, and yeah, it's you know, I feel like this is all wrapped up in you know the 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 principles in like DIY, and like,
Mhm.
I think that's why this conversation is happening, and it doesn't, I think that earnestness and everything is still coming through, even though sometimes like we maybe sound like we could have been at like a snooty art gallery, talking about like, what this painting really means or whatever, like, and
I feel, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I,
it's all, it's it's I think it's all like important to talk about, and it,
yeah.
it it helps like people connect to one another, and also like, it, sometimes it's like this stuff is, there really is something that people can take away and put these things into action, you know.
I feel like um, maybe this is me sort of. Maybe this is like a defensive reaction. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like I don't know. I feel like it's kind of fine to take things seriously. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like, especially kind of things that are kind of quite meaningful to you, and like, or whatever, like. But I feel like sometimes there can be kind of like a bit of like shyness towards doing that, or kind of like a fear that you'll kind of like be made fun of in some way, or like come across as being like, I don't know, or it's like somehow kind of like a kind of like social misstep in some way or another, to kind of like be too kind of serious in the way you're kind of like expressing your passion for something. um but yeah, I don't know, I felt like, and this is just like my kind of personal feelings, but I just kind of really, I always really like when I hear people kind of talking like in that kind of way about stuff, and kind of like just, yeah, just being like, well, this is something that's important to me, and I do have like, thoughts and feelings, and like taking this like thing that, in the grand scheme of the world or whatever, is not like massively important, but it is something that's important to me. So it's like, and I do have strong emotional reactions to it, and that, like, I feel like that's something that kind of like, um yeah, can sometimes need a bit more space before it gets kind of like shut down into kind of
Yeah.
like being like, oh, but I need to make like some kind of like joke here to make everyone comfortable again or something. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Like,
No, it's. I think I know what you're saying. I mean, yeah. It's like I used the art gallery metaphor, and that, or
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't even know if that's the right way to put that, but I used that instance because I was thinking about this writer that I like, and she was talking about, she writes comics, and she was talking about how like she's pretty incredible, but like she was talking about how she paints, and she actually
right,
like she kind of basically got discovered, like,
right,
and they flew her over into the US, and they gave her this art gallery showing, and she shows up, and she sort of like walks in and hears people talking about like her paintings in a certain way, you know, which is like,
Right.
it would be like, you know, I don't know, I can only imagine it would be like the parents from Beetlejuice, you know, the way that they're all talking about like this or that. And and she's just like, I sat the glass of champagne down and I left. And
Right.
it's like, we're all worried that that's what we're going to sound like, you know? And so
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes that makes it harder for us to like get where we want to go, where we're trying to say the way we feel about this. Cause you know, we're worried about like, you know, coming off like
Yeah.
that. But I think,
Yeah. It's
I
like
mean,
that kind of fear of being like, well, I feel like it's kind of goes both ways. There's kind of like a certain like sense of you know, kind of self-awareness of when you're starting to kind of like I don't know, if you're kind of like verging into being a bit pretentious or whatever.
mhm.
But then there's another kind of avenue where it's just kind of like a bit of a fear of being like just vulnerable in general,
Yeah.
or kind of like just making things kind of like a bit like uncomfortable because you've kind of like put out a level of sincerity that's kind of like maybe like difficult to immediately meet or something like this, or
Yeah.
like, oh, I didn't know, like, you know what I mean, like,
Yeah. I mean,
so yeah.
I think it can, I think that, you know, like, the amount of light that can be shed on a piece of art based on like the conversations around it are like vast, and I think that's really fascinating because like, I mean, I've listened to podcasts where a guy that writes the Wolverine comic where like, you know,
Right.
Wolverine is just like stabbing people with claws. We know what Wolverine does, right? And like,
Right.
this guy's talking about like, you know, like what this whole story was supposed to mean, and it's like the way that he's, you know, talking about it is this really like the machinations behind all of the story decisions and whatever, and you're like, I
Sure.
read that and I just thought that Wolverine stabbed a bunch of people and then like whatever, and
Yeah.
like that particular instance is like is a that's a very like severe case of like what could what someone's intention could be versus what the person absorbing the art form like can get out of it. That's like, you know, but that's
Yeah.
kind of my point, is like that's how vast it can be. And
Sure.
yeah, I don't know, I really have always enjoyed like, you know, I think that one thing that happens is sometimes like when you're talking about stuff like this is you're like always like I'm sort of like, well, I'm not going to go there until somebody else goes there, you know, and then, you know,
Yeah.
it's a safe space for being a bit pretentious or whatever, you know. But yeah,
I
I've just always found that kind of stuff fascinating. It's like
For sure.
you don't like, you never really do know. And then like, yeah, what you know or what you don't know can influence your own connection, you know, with something, you know, based on how that lined up with your worldview or your own perceptions of the art in the first place, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that was my conversation with Zoe and Adam from Demcats. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with me. I had a really lovely time. Thanks to all of y'all for listening wherever you are as well. I know a couple of the latest episodes have been long, and I really appreciate you sticking around to the end because I think that there's a lot of value in some of these conversations. Until next time, take care and do good things.